Well, if you've kept an aquarium before, chances are you've dealt with it. Algae is a plant-like organism that often finds its way into our aquariums uninvited. It ranges in size from single-celled microscopic organisms to giant kelp forests as tall as 10-story buildings. In your freshwater aquarium, algae can take on many different shapes and colors, from slimy green mats to fuzzy gray patches. A little bit of algae can add the perfect touch of nature to an aquarium. Too much, on the other hand, is an eyesore. For the most part, algae is not bad for an aquarium. In fact, a lot of fish will enjoy grazing on algae, or the little microscopic critters that live in it. Problem is that algae can quickly get out of hand. It competes with plants for nutrients and light. When it covers plants, it suffocates them and can eventually result in their death. Algae can also clog up filters, causing stagnant water. And in extreme cases, though quite uncommon, it's possible for large algae blooms to deplete oxygen levels at night. On the other hand, algae blooms can also crash and die, resulting in lethal ammonia spikes. The 7 most common types of freshwater algae, especially when it comes to planted aquariums, are blackbeard, brown or diatomaceous, green spot, green dust, blue-green, which is actually a cyanobacteria, green hair, and green water. The most common reasons for algae in aquariums is that there are too many nutrients, like ammonia or nitrates, in our water column, and or the lights are too bright. Of course, that's an extreme oversimplification considering how many different types of algae there are and specific causes for each type. Not to mention, there are plenty of planted tanks with high levels of light and fertilizers that don't have loads of algae. There are lots of triggers for specific types of algae, but unless you're doing a high-tech planted aquarium, the best thing you can do is keep your light at a modest level for no more than 8 hours a day, keep your water clean with weekly or bi-weekly water changes, and provide some sort of lean fertilization for your plants. Because algae uses light and nutrients to photosynthesize and grow, it makes sense that keeping both those levels low would help keep algae at bay. Well, how would fertilizing plants help control algae? It sounds counterproductive, but a lean regimen of fertilizing will keep plants healthy, and algae has a hard time growing on healthy plants. If plants don't get the nutrition they require, they'll start to break down their own leaves, resulting in ammonia, which algae loves. I'll go over specific causes and solutions for each type of algae mentioned. However, the first thing you should do with any algae is physically remove as much of it as you can. Don't be afraid to use your fingers to pinch and pluck away. Scissors can be used to cut off infested leaves. Brushes are good for scraping off wood. Sponges are great for glass, but in some cases a razor blade will be needed. Just be sure not to scrape the silicone seals on your aquarium. Do a big water change. Last but not least, lower the light level, at least until the algae outbreak is under control. Types of algae: appearance, sources, and solutions. This fuzzy gray to black algae is one of the more common nuisance algae in planted aquariums. Although I don't mind having a few clumps of it here and there, it can quickly get out of hand. It's best to remove any blackbeard algae before it spreads. You'll usually see it growing on tips of leaves or hardscape first. Blackbeard is often associated with high levels of nutrients, organic waste, and intense lighting. In aquariums with CO2, fluctuating or low levels of CO2 can result in blackbeard algae. Siphon out all organic waste and do a big water change, roughly 50%. If you don't have CO2, consider getting some. If you do have CO2, make sure that the levels are at a constant 30 parts per million. Diatomaceous algae is brown, slimy, and strand-like. Outbreaks can feel really overwhelming because they tend to take over the entire tank out of nowhere. Fortunately, these usually take care of themselves over the course of a couple weeks. Brown algae usually shows up early, maybe a month or so after setting up an aquarium. It's often associated with aquariums that have sand beds. Brown algae can be best removed from an aquarium by lightly brushing and twirling it with a toothbrush. Brown algae outbreaks are often pretty severe, but they usually disappear as quickly as they arrived, in about a week or two. With that being said, don't kill yourself trying to remove every strand of brown algae. It really isn't possible and will keep coming back till it decides to clear up. This looks exactly like it sounds. Green spot algae are little green spots that show up on glass, hardscapes, and slow-growing leaves. It's a very common algae that isn't usually as aggressive as some of the other types. Green spot tends to show up in tanks with high lighting and low phosphates. Put slow growing plants in shaded parts of your tank. If you're not using fertilizer, consider getting some with phosphates or increasing what you're currently using. CO2 also helps keep green spot algae down. This is another one that looks just like it's been named, green dust. It's very similar in appearance to green spot algae, except it forms a uniform surface. This algae will often grow along the glass of a tank and can spread extremely quickly. Green dust is common in new tanks with young plant communities. High levels of lighting in combination with high levels of nutrients and young plant communities will make the perfect storm for green dust algae. If your tank is young and the plants are still filling in, chances are the green dust will take care of itself. That's what happened in the picture here. Reason being is that when plants get larger, they usually outcompete green dust for nutrients. Reducing fertilizers and lighting, plus diligently staying on top of 50% weekly water changes will help keep this algae at bay. Blue-green algae looks slimy and is normally bluish-green, although it can range from red to dark green, and can either be strand-like or grow into full-on mats. This algae is actually a type of bacteria, cyanobacteria. For all intents and purposes, it can be considered an algae. It's uninvited, uses nutrients and lights to grow, and can take over our aquariums. If left unchecked, it will quickly take over the aquarium, blocking light and preventing plants from photosynthesizing. They can deplete the water column of oxygen at night when the lights are off. There are some opposing views on the causes of cyanobacteria in freshwater aquariums. One of the more popular views, and what I've observed, is that outbreaks most often occur in tanks with low flow and high organic waste buildup. This is especially true in tanks with high light and infrequent water changes. There are two ways to remove cyanobacteria from the planted aquarium. The first is a chemical-free approach. Black out your aquarium. Put a material over it so that literally no light gets through, but make sure to allow for ventilation so that oxygen can reach the tank. A thick blanket should do the trick. Do this for 3 to 5 days. ChemiClean is a product designed to eradicate cyanobacteria in both salt and freshwater aquariums. I've personally used it for both. It's extremely effective, and if you follow the directions, it will pose no harm to your tank. But make sure to follow the directions closely. Overdosing can lead to toxic conditions for livestock. Green hair algae looks just like it sounds. Green and hair-like. There are actually many types of green hair algae, but they all look green and fibrous. When green hair algae gets out of hand, it can take over an aquarium and look more like a mat than tufts of hair. Green hair algae outbreaks are often caused by low flow and low CO2 concentrations. High levels of light, especially in tanks without CO2, can result in extreme outbreaks. Make sure that the filter provides a turnover rate of 5 to 8 times the total tank volume per hour, and make sure there are no stagnant spots where detritus can build up. In combination with flow rate, implementing or maintaining a steady level of CO2 at 30 parts per million is the most effective way to keep green hair algae from returning. Green water algae is literally when the aquarium water turns green. That's because billions of microscopic algae called phytoplankton tint the water. Although it's perfectly natural to have some phytoplankton in your tank, outbreaks can get out of hand very suddenly. Green water algae is fond of strong natural light and is most common in tanks that sit near windows. Infrequent water changes in combination with high fish waste are also big contributors to this type of algae. Reducing the light on your aquarium and doing frequent water changes are the cheapest remedies for green water. If you want quick results, a UV sterilizer will do a lot of the work for you. It's still important to consider the underlying causes. A UV sterilizer will help get rid of green water, but if dirty water is the cause of the outbreak, it will not make the aquarium safer for fish. There is no workaround for doing proper maintenance on your aquarium. Stay on top of things. A little bit of algae is perfectly normal in an aquarium and even looks nice, but don't let things get out of hand. The best way to prevent major algae outbreaks is to stay on top of weekly or bi-weekly water changes. Manually remove algae once a week when doing water changes, and make sure your tank isn't getting too much light. Last but not least, don't beat yourself up over an algae outbreak. It's nothing that can't be resolved, plus we've all been there. I know how frustrating it can be to deal with, but if you treat the underlying causes, you can take care of any algae outbreak. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your support for my channel. I'll gradually release some more detailed videos on on each algae discussed here. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and hit that like or subscribe button. See you in the next one.